Hi, this is Dave. I'm the developer of USA Operations. This is my first demo video, and I hope you all put up with me because I'm not a podcaster or anything like that. I'm a software developer and a manager of software developers. This project came out of the idea from Andrew Yang that we should not be basing our judgment of how we as a country are doing based on stock market and GDP only. Um, and I really like this. There's a law called Goodblatt's law that says when the metric becomes the target, the metric ceases to be useful. And so we set GDP and stock market as our only targets, and they're really metrics. And so what we as a country have done is tweaked our finances to pump up those numbers, leading to these great increases in productivity, while at the same time we see society having some really significant problems because of it. And Yang was talking about this on the campaign trail. I'm very sorry that he dropped out, but I thought this would be a good thing to go forward. So I think that we should not have just one or two, we should have a series of them. And what I've done is built a system, goes out, gathers all of this data, and combines it into some graphs that I use Grafana to show off. And then we can discuss these. This video is meant to attract interest from people about these who can represent some of these ideas, who can analyze them, and get some help for people who are better at podcasting who can talk about these. But I want to go through some real quick right now to show you what I'm thinking. So I've broken them down into four big titles: economics, freedom, government, and social. Let's start off with economics. This is just to check some of the basic economic information that I've gleaned from the internet. This is Grafana. The interface is actually pretty easy to use. You can see here we're looking at the past 25 years. I figured that was pretty useful. And part of this is to show that this really isn't a partisan thing, that things have this sort of like long tail that isn't one person or another. But okay. So up top we have manufacturing employment. We know that this is a problem, that we've lost millions and millions of manufacturing employees, and this is a number of thousands. So you can see back in 1996 we had about 18 million. So 18K times 1,000 is 18 million manufacturing jobs. And then sometime in starting in 2008, 2009, we met this cliff where we just dropped a bunch, but we also had a bunch dropped in 2001. So we've got a drop off here and a drop off here. What happened in both of those? In both of those we had pretty major recessions. Right in 2000 we started with the major recession, and actually I've got a Grafana problem. I'm off by about a year here. Oh no, I'm not. I'm sorry. In 2000 we started the end of the dot-com boom, or the dot-com bust recession. And you can see we lost millions until it finally tapered off in end of 2003, beginning of 2004. And then we hit another recession in 2008. You can see that the recession leads the drop off a little bit, but it dropped pretty dramatically about a year afterwards and bottomed out in 2010. And then it started to recover. Now, I think a lot of people see this and say, well, this is Bush's fault and this is Obama's fault. I personally don't buy that. First of all, we see very similar patterns for two different presidents and two different parties. Plus, I just don't see the president as controlling this as much. This is controlled by recessions. You can see a increase in manufacturing employment starting again. And so you had, like in 2016, you had Hillary Clinton talking about how manufacturing is coming back. And you can see there was an increase here, but I mean, come on. We ended it at, just over 12 million, where we started at, about 17.5 million. So there's a loss of about 5.5 million jobs, even, after that recovery. That's a pretty tepid recovery. But you can see see the patterns here. Now let's talk about healthcare spending. I don't think I've got a great graph here. One of the things I'd like is if anybody out there is better at finding this data. It needs to be consumable by a computer. It needs to have an API. But we used to spend in 2002 at the start of this measurement around $1.6 trillion. And by the end of the measurement in in 2018, we spent about 3.6. That's an increase of about $2 trillion, or about more than doubling how much we spend on healthcare every year. Some of that comes from the rise of boomers, which I'm not measuring here, but even given the advent of Obamacare right around here, it didn't really change how much we are spending on healthcare. Okay, now personal finances. I found savings very interesting. The 401k assets, as the stock market drops, 401k assets will drop because 401k is an investment in the stock market. We had a pretty massive recession start in 2006 that led by 2008 a decline in the value. But even through the real drop off, we see the value of 401k assets growing. They kind of flattened out for a little bit right during the Obama recession or the Bush recession, depending on what you want to say. But the 2008 to 2010, we saw a little bit of a flattening, but they've continued to grow. So this is what a focus on the stock market gives us: is people's 401ks do well because it's invested in the stock market. Contributions are also very similar, but you can see they lag. Because of recession, people stopped contributing as much. So you see the rise in 401k contributions. This is by year. Stop, but then they began to go up again, and then we stopped measuring. A lot of these data sources I have don't have recent measurements. So we can't see if 401k contributions have continued or not. But you can see it's pretty well tied to recession as well. When people don't have jobs, they don't contribute to their finances. Social. Okay, so stock market and finances are all well and good, but social I think really matters. I put up top two sources for suicide rates, and you can see that they're very different data. One only measures every 5 years or so, but every 5 years you can see the number of suicides per 100,000 people. So in 2001, we had about 11.3 people kill themselves for every 100,000 people we had. Given that we have about 330 million people here, that's 3,500 or so. And it's gone up to about 15.3 recently. This is a bad thing. Oh, and you can see on this one, which measures much more frequently but started later, a similar rise. Why is this one so much more steep? Because the scale here is different. But you can see in 2010 it was about 12, and in here it shows about 13 per 100,000. So the numbers are pretty similar. They're measuring the same thing. It's just different studies, and both of them show the number of suicides in this country are going up regularly and steadily. I don't think I need to argue with anyone that's bad. You're an evangelical Christian right-winger, that's bad. Christians don't like suicides, obviously. But if you're a left-winger, Bernie bro, socialist, you also don't like suicides. This isn't a partisan thing. I thought fertility rates and death rates were interesting. I would have expected to see a higher rise in death rates because as boomers age, they're dying off at faster rates than the lower population younger people. And yeah, we see a slight rise here, but comparing death rates to the 1970s, where out of 1,000 people, 9.3 died, in 2015, out of 1,000 people, 8.44. So death rates aren't up. I'm a little confused by this number. And fertility rates, as the economy goes badly, fertility rates should drop. And sure enough, we saw in the 1970s this sort of and through the 80s, this depression in fertility rates that came back in the 90s. A lot of this has to do with the confidence in the country, the confidence in the future. And whatever you may think of Reagan, he was a very inspiring person. And so I think this general feeling of American greatness and optimism for the future that happened during the Reagan times is reflected in higher fertility rates. I think I'm missing a lot of data in the social area, and I'm still looking for good sources and ideas of what we can have. The next one I found very interesting is number of journalists killed. So freedom, I think this section has a lot to be added. there's this concern that the current rhetoric about, journalists being the enemies of the people and bad for our country, this fourth estate being something that's a negative, has led to an increase in journalists killed. And sure enough, we can see this uptick right here in 2018. But here's the thing: the uptick is the number of journalists or media workers, sort of generally, killed in the U.S. went from two down to one, up to two, and then down to one, and up to six. So that's a six times or three times, depending on how you count it. It makes for a very dramatic graph. But in a year, we've had six journalists killed. I do in here put the sources, and you can go and take a look at these. And let's go ahead and do that now, slowly. So here we have a slightly nicer looking breakdown of this one. I didn't include this full breakdown because I want the charts to be easy to compare one to another. And so you can see motive, confirmed motive. We know that four people killed journalists for the sake of killing journalists. One, the motive has been unconfirmed, and one is a media worker, not necessarily a journalist. And we can go down here and see who was murdered. And so 2018, we can say, for instance, like Rebecca Smith from the Capital Gazette, we can get why she was murdered. A sales assistant for the Capital Gazette was a targeted attack. Jared Ramos, 38, was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Apparently, he wanted to kill journalists. I'm saying he. I'm assuming Jared is a he. So, 4 confirmed targeted attacks against journalists is bad. But there's kind of the sense that it's like hundreds. And it's not hundreds. It's 6. I don't mean to dismiss any death of journalists is awful, but it does kind of put it into context. And the last one I want to go over is government. We see a lot of talk about deficit, but I don't even put the deficit up here. What we have instead is a comparison of government spending and tax receipts. So there's this feeling that the Obama years were filled with huge deficits. But the truth is, government spending peaked in 2008, but kind of leveled off in 2010 and didn't start increasing again until 2015. This one's really interesting. Government employment peaked in 2010. Why would that be? And you can see another peak in 2000. A peak in government spending 2 years apart. I wonder if there's 10 years apart. I'm wondering if there's a government program that happens every 10 years that costs a lot of money. That would be the census. Yeah, we started spending very heavily to do this constitutionally mandated census. So you see a huge increase in government employment. But by the time 2014 came around, government employment was much less. Was that Obama or the austerity put in by the Republican Congress? I'm not the one to analyze that. I'm a manager of software engineering. But I think this is ripe for analysis. Then we can see tax receipts crumbled in 2008. Like, this is just a shocking drop in tax receipts. I think this is in millions, so it's 1.5 billion down to 1 billion. 1.6 billion down to 1 billion. So we lost half a billion. Does that make sense? I'm not sure what this is measured in. I need to go look that up. But then through the stimulus, we started rising again, and we did very well until about 2015 when stuff started to cool off. And we've stayed pretty much stagnant since then. That you can see the effect of the Trump tax cuts here. The tax receipts, you can see there was a distinct drop because of them, and we've had a recovery, but the recovery has been pretty tepid. On the other hand, government spending tapered off in 2010, started to rise slowly in 2015, 2016, and continue to rise at a fairly steep rate here. Why? Well, when we don't see an increase in government employment, which we don't have the numbers here for, but all my sense is that we don't see an increase in government employment. What that means are that people are using more government services. Now, the left would say people using government services is good. That's what government is here for, and the tax receipts should match the increase in government spending, because generally an increase in use of government services follows an increase in population, right? However, as the economy goes poorly and more people rely on, food stamps and SNAP and disability and whatever else to get through their day, the safety net that government gives us, we also see a rise in government spending, which we can see here. This is a fairly steep rise in government spending due to this decrease in tax receipts. People making less money, they rely on the government more, and thus you see, if we had a deficit chart up here, you would see a huge increase in the deficit right then. But as people got back to work, government spending flattened off and tax receipts increased, and that's where we saw the drop in deficits. But here, tax receipts have leveled off, but spending has not, and that's where we see the increase in deficits. I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad. I just think it's interesting. So, to go back up to this dashboard, those are the 4 sections that we have, and I'm still building what those sources of data are, but I'm hoping that this will give people that some inspiration to come and talk to me. I want to give one final note. I post some on Quora and I read various, chat boards and whatever. And people are always asking, where is there a source of information that does not have this spin? I hope that that's this. These are just pure facts. And in all the ones that I actually did this for, you can click on it and you can get the source of data. This one's from the St. Louis Fed, who has a wonderful API. Whoever's running the St. Louis Fed's API and data needs 2 big thumbs up. Someone should figure out who that person is and send them a gift or thumbs up or something, because that's wonderful. But I also get sources from USA Facts, from the World Health Organization. These are non-partisan. These are just pure data. And I hope that people can come to this website and can use this data that I'm exposing to educate themselves on what is actually going on without all the spin, without Rush Limbaugh and Rachel Maddow, or even your angry uncle or your pink-haired niece. Everyone has their own spin. This is just data. It does not have its own spin. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it inspired you to help me and to contribute to this project. Thank you very much.